Hello, this is Ron Gerber, CEO of AngelBeat. I'm so excited to have Stephen Clark here from Fortinet, their Cloud Sales Director for the Eastern United States. One of the big things that we see at AngelBeat at all of our live events is rapid adoption at an exponential rate for cloud computing, which again can take different forms. There's pure private cloud computing, there's public cloud computing, there's hybrid cloud computing when you're integrating on-prem and public cloud services, and increasingly there is multi-cloud computing where organizations may not want to put everything in one of the big public cloud providers. They might want to use Microsoft Azure for certain things, AWS or even Google Cloud Platform, GCP for other things. So it's a very complicated and potentially sprawling architecture that nonetheless offers incredibly powerful benefits around flexibility, avoiding CapEx, and instead relying upon much more manageable OpEx spending, etc. But the problem is that if you don't rely upon experts like Stephen and the Fortinet organization, is you may run afoul from a security standpoint and from a related standpoint, from a compliance standpoint. You know, there is very much a shared security responsibility model in cloud computing where you as an end user need to have control over your data. The public cloud providers such as the Microsoft and AWS and GCPs do a very good job of basically securing the cloud and providing a range of services, but you still need trusted third-party organizations like Fortinet to close any gaps. And when we're talking compliance, it covers a range of different issues. There's your internal compliance. What did your senior management establish as your requirements for securing data, backing it up? What about your financial auditors if you are a public company? What about general IT audit compliance? And then if you have even some operations internationally, even if you don't work in Europe but maybe have suppliers in Europe, you're going to be susceptible and have to have compliance with GDPR. There are similar data privacy requirements emerging even on a state-specific level in the United States. So for a variety of these reasons, I think Stephen's talk is going to be incredibly meaningful as people want to embrace the cloud, they want to understand the security behind it, and just as importantly, they want to get some insights on how to ensure compliance across a range of regulatory, government-imposed, and internally imposed guidelines. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Stephen and encourage everyone to increasingly rely upon AngelBeat for your digital on-demand learning. We hope to have many more webinars because Fortinet, as many people know, has a broad array of security, firewall solutions that I think will be of great interest to you. And the final comment I want to make is the angelbeat.com website is a great resource. Just go to Contact Us, or you can go to the Fortinet website as well if you have specific questions, and we'll make sure those get answered. So without any further ado, let me turn it over to Stephen.
Great. Thanks, Ron, and thanks for allowing us to participate today. I really appreciate it. Just want to have one quick slide on here with my contact information. Should you guys have any future questions, always feel free to reach out to me. Very straightforward, Stephen Clark at Fortinet.com. Thought it makes sense to take a couple seconds and talk about who Fortinet is. Ron did a really good job with that. A couple key highlights here. Roughly $16 billion market cap, $2 billion in revenue for 2019, one of the fastest growing cybersecurity companies. 450,000 customers, and why is that important? We have roughly 4 million appliances out there, so a massive sensor network that we'll talk about on a couple slides down the path here as well. 30% global firewall shipment, $200 million in research and development spent last year, and then 650 patents. So we do a lot of our own organic growth here at Fortinet. I want to talk about how it's hard to build these automations when you take a look at what's happening from the ecosystem around response and mitigation. First and foremost, there's too many vendors. We've done a couple studies. One showed that 14% of CISOs had more than 20 vendors that they were dealing with from a security standpoint. Additionally, up to 50 of them, up to 10% of them had over 50 different security vendors they were dealing with. Secondly,
50?
there's too many.
Wow.
50.
I want to make sure it's not just 5 or 15, it's 50.
No, it was 50, correct. In the same study, we found that 35% is seeing between 10,000 and 500,000 alerts. And ironically, only 24% of these are legitimate. So obviously, there's a lot of white noise when you take a look at all these different alerts. 79% said it was somewhat or very challenging to orchestrate all these alerts. Not very shocking there. And then the biggest thing that we see is just a lack of trained people, right? So any kind of estimate you want to use, Forrester, Frost & Sullivan, et cetera, they're all saying we're short by about 1 million people when it comes to the need for cybersecurity professionals. And that obviously changes every single day. As Ron mentioned, there's a ton of regulations and compliance, right? It's clearly here to stay. One thing that I found very interesting is that 25% of the legal team and cybersecurity team are spent on dealing with regulation and compliance. And in some cases, it's actually poor things they're dealing with, such as a breach, right? So all of a sudden, you now have everything thrown on top of you, and you're dealing with all these different regulations and compliance. So clearly, this is here to stay. And we're continuing to see new regulations and new compliance being pushed out. Obviously, the GDPR mandate has been tremendously expensive and costly for folks here in the States to implement as well. When you take a look at the risk, it's really on the client themselves, right? IT teams aren't able to secure things that they don't know about. If we look at the beginning of cloud adoption, it started with employees acquiring applications for collaboration and file sharing. The reality is that was the beginning of what was called shadow IT. So when you're taking a look at what's happening within the cloud, it's important to be able to verify what is that cloud service provider, what are they doing for me when it comes to regulations and policies. Secondly, how do I have an SLA in place to deal with some of these different compliance pieces? How are they dealing with encryption and data from both transit and from when it's sitting in a rest state as well? If we want to take it one particular example, it's a large financial firm. They had someone unauthorized access data and then posted all that data up on GitHub, right? At the end of the day, we all remember who the client was, but we don't always remember who the actual cloud service provider was. And lastly, the shared responsibility model. I'll talk about that a couple times in this presentation, but the reality is, as I mentioned, you as the client are the one responsible for securing your data. When we look at the transition into SaaS and infrastructure as a service, it's pretty clear that, Gartner pretty much has this right. 99% of clients will be the ones who are creating these security failures. Misconfiguration issues obviously being one of the biggest ones. The CASB space was clearly a space that came out, half a dozen years ago, and has been really the first technology to take a look at how do I secure SaaS. Frost & Sullivan is saying the CASB space will exceed $1.1 billion next year. It's no longer should I have one, it's like when am I going to actually implement something to protect my applications like Salesforce.com. Well, organizations have embraced public cloud infrastructure of all kinds in a big way, but the result in increased security complexity. Built-in security tools for the various cloud providers are unique and incompatible. Consistently managing risk across all cloud renders security operations in a multi-cloud world time-consuming and ineffective. If we take a look at what shadow IT has done, right, it's a good example of how many SaaS services do I have out there. I just talked about a couple of the key points, right? Loss of visibility and control, lack of policy enforcement, exposure to threats from the cloud. And probably the most important one is if I do my lift and shift to the cloud, how do I secure some of these legacy data applications, right? Firewalls have been very helpful for brick and mortar on-prem, but how do I secure these applications that are legacy as they move into a SaaS model?
Hey, Stephen, one of the interesting things that I heard about at a recent live AngelBeat event concerned HIPAA and the dangers of shadow IT. There's someone at a large hospital chain who uploaded sensitive patient data. not because he wanted to do something malicious. He was trying to analyze data, look at costs, look at how do we save money without damaging our patients' health, for all the right reasons, and he just wasn't sensitive to HIPAA, but he had a shadow IT initiatives. I guess that's not necessarily the right word, but he was able to do this, and the response became very serious because it ended up being a formal HIPAA breach that literally cost millions of dollars to do. So I point that out because it reinforces the importance of the Fortinet solution, as well as, if you don't come to AngelBeat and this organization missed our last show, these are some of the dangers you run into.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And I think everyone looks at these risks and assumes it's a configuration issue, it's a management error, but the reality is a fair amount of it is just a user making a poor decision, right? Whether it's in healthcare, we've seen this in biopharmas where someone's doing some research and decides to, post it someplace. We won't name the cloud service provider. And all of a sudden, there's all that data sitting there. But the reality is they're doing what's right for themselves and being able to expedite what they're working on. It's just not the right solution based upon what level of compliance they have to deal with. So I totally agree with you, Ron. The next thing I want to talk about is how digital transformation has increased the attack surface. Cloud was the #1 digital transformation in 2019. I was at Disney about 2 years ago for a Fortinet event, and they now give you a bracelet, and that bracelet actually has your room key on it, and it actually has your credit card if you want to get a burger at the bar one afternoon. What I found interesting is now all my information is sitting on a wrist bracelet. And what happens is if someone actually picks up that wrist bracelet, they now can get into my room. They can now actually charge stuff on my credit card. To secure critical data in multi-cloud infrastructure, organizations need to be able to essentially monitor, store documents, identify malware and activity with sensitive data, and identify and investigate data leakage in the cloud environment. So now you're being tasked with cloud management APIs, cloud interconnects, containers, right, which has become very critical for people to secure their container environments. And obviously, how do I feed all of these different products into my orchestration system? The threats, right? This is an ongoing, with everything happening today in the world, there now are hackers using coronavirus maps to steal information, right? So they don't take a day off. If you take a look at the risk of bots and attack frameworks, we have a group called FortiGuard Labs. We analyze 160 billion events daily. We found in the fourth quarter of 2019, 34,000 new malware variants. That's a 128% increase over the first quarter of the same year. When you take a look at multi-layered attack strategies and what's happening from attacks hidden encrypted traffic, today bots are over 40% of the bandwidth being consumed in the United States. And SSL traffic is somewhere between 80% and 90% based upon who you talk to. One other key point that I found very interesting is that cybercrime now costs a typical organization roughly $13 million. So with digital transformation has led us to these new threats. So we take a look at the challenges, right? By 2020, they say most companies will be sitting in multiple clouds. So we now need cross-platform visibility. Ron talked about this, complexity-driven human errors, right? They're not always malicious. They're done by mistake. Regulatory compliance, and obviously the explosion of data. Cloud misconfigurations cost companies nearly $5 trillion last year, and more than 33 billion records have been exposed over the last 2 years. So this shift to the cloud and being able to monitor and deal with compliance has become a daunting task. So we took a look at some of the challenges created in multi-hybrid cloud. First and foremost, visibility and control. Too hard to manage. We talked about that earlier, right? Too many point solutions for different clouds and data centers. Huge gaps from a security standpoint, right? The shared responsibility model is very confusing. I was in Toronto for a cloud event last week, and the gentleman I was talking to said, "Oh yeah, my cloud service provider has everything covered for me." I'm like, if you're comfortable with a layer 3, layer 4, basically knuckles for a firewall, you are covered. But it reminds me of the AT&T commercials, right? Good is just not good enough today, right? We need to have more robust security in the cloud. And then obviously from a compliance standpoint, right? Hundreds of cloud services are added daily. Hard to prove compliance to auditors, especially when security teams are not giving the right tools to actually do the audits themselves. So I mentioned earlier about the shared responsibility model. And as Ron said, on the shift from on-prem to SaaS, or infrastructure service, you see on the right-hand side the 10 areas that we could basically walk down to the data center and identify immediately. Now as moving to infrastructure as a service, there's a cross between who owns that, right? Is it owned by the cloud service provider, or is it owned by you as the client? And then SaaS, it's even more daunting with all the different shifts between, is it customer management of risk, is it a shared management of risk, or is it the provider who's actually managing that risk? So when we look at moving into the cloud, we kind of looked at 5 key areas from a overall assessment: risk management, data security, threat detection and response, compliance and traffic analysis, and investigation. So from the risk management standpoint, talked about this before, expanded attack surface, complexity leads to errors, proliferation of privileged users. The challenge each organization has is they have to assess their cyber risk posture. One report attributes 70% of cloud data breaches to misconfigurations. Organizations' cloud infrastructure should be continually monitored to ensure issues are flagged and resolved in a timely manner. Analysis tools should be available to help security teams understand the lifecycle of configuration changes across their multi-cloud environments. Threat detection and response, expanded attack surface, thousands of new apps, proliferation of privileged users. So obviously with this increased complexity comes up with potential for configuration errors. Threats in the public cloud can occur for various reasons. We just talked about it, right? Including misconfiguration of the cloud itself, the use of vulnerable software versions, the implementation of insecure code in cloud applications. Security teams need to have the capability of overseeing these security investigations. They need tools that make it easier for them to provide meaningful and end-user insights back to the DevOps folks. It would be nice to see if we got to a point where security was brought in at the very beginning of a DevOps project.
Well, we are seeing that a little bit. One of the things, Stephen, that we're seeing yet another 3-syllable acronym now is not just DevOps, but DevOpsSec Ops, where that is coming, but still not there yet, and hopefully that will be one of the changes that emerge in the very near future.
Yeah, you know, that's a great point, Ron. In the questionnaire that we did, we identified, like I mentioned, how many different vendors they had. There was somewhere in the area of, I think, 40 to 60%, kind of a rough swag there, of companies who were seeing that exactly what you spoke about, whether it's called Sec DevOps or DevSecOps, right? The capability of having these organizations work more in more harmony today than they are, right? So totally agree with you. Great point.
Yeah. One of the things that I see a lot is that security now has to be pervasive throughout your organization. I mean, it's sort of like the coronavirus crisis. It's everyone's responsibility, not just the physicians, to work together to mitigate and hopefully contain this crisis. In a similar sense, in the technology world, everyone has to understand their responsibilities around security. Everyone needs to be aware of that, so you're not like that hospital situation where, again, for the best of intentions, someone trying to do his job better created an enormous problem. So everything's changing, and despite the complexity of these challenges, Stephen is shortly going to get to the solutions and how Fortinet can help you deal with all this so you stay out of the headlines.
Nice lead-in, Ron. Thank you. So let's talk about traffic analysis and investigation, right? Gaps in network security policies, lack of visibility from a cloud resources, difficulty to inventory cloud assets, right? So the challenge is a sprawling cloud infrastructure means that users store unsolicited data sets in unorganized fashions across the cloud. This results in significant unknown risk, right, if I don't know what's happening from a code standpoint. Anything but a multi-purpose, comprehensive file scanning and monitoring solution falls short of identifying risk from a file transfer pattern. Secure critical data in multi-cloud infrastructure. Organizations need to be able to constantly monitor, store documents, identify malware, and activity with sensitive data to identify and investigate data leakage in the environment. Right? Data leakage has become one of the new terms, right, of the norm, unfortunately. So we take a look at compliance, right? Multi-cloud compliance is hard to verify. Complexity leads to errors, and obviously manual review, right? So the big thing that we see, there's really two main problems with the cloud sprawl. It's the increased risk of network intrusions brought on by potential configuration errors, and the inability to adequately monitor network traffic. Monitoring network traffic within and between clouds and detecting suspicious activity with the traffic requires specific tools. So the ability to effectively detect, remediate network intrusions, and protect critical services, security teams need the ability to view the topology of all the cloud resources, monitor and analyze network traffic, and drill down on specific services and traffic patterns that are suspicious. So we came out with a product called FortiCWP, which fits into the new Gartner quadrant of CWPP. And really, as I mentioned earlier, we're looking at risk management, data security, threat detection, compliance, threat analysis, investigation. What we're providing is key visibility across all these different cloud platforms, automation remediation for policies, and then, of course, compliance, discovery, and reporting. I want to thank you for your time. Hopefully this was helpful as we move into this new area of cloud compliancy. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you very much. I think it was very useful. Just a couple of other concluding comments. First of all, Fortinet has a range of channel partners that they work with who can help deploy and configure the CWP solution in your environment to try and understand exactly what you have. That's a very critically important subject. And just in general, as people are embracing the cloud, I just want to reiterate, because I see that a lot, I'm going to go back to the 50 security vendors. A lot of organizations we find are embracing the cloud, basically in the public cloud world, there's Google, Microsoft, and Amazon, and there's not many others. So it's easy to manage your public cloud providers. And what we find is organizations are increasingly going to that environment, and that's also providing catalyst for having the CIO and his or her team look at their array of vendors and potentially consolidate. That's where we see a lot of great interest in Fortinet having multiple solutions, because what Fortinet does behind the scenes is understand these complexities. They're not just tied in just to AWS. You want to work with Microsoft, Azure, fine. We've got capabilities, work with all these partners. We're finding it in this world of digital transformation with so many new threats out there. I mean, I can guarantee you that every crisis, such as the current coronavirus, leads to a IT security breach where people are sending out emails today that look valid, saying, click here, I've got 100 face masks that you can get, and in response, you launch a ransomware attack. So it's very exciting times as technology is evolving. It can be very dangerous, but not if you use companies like Fortinet to keep you safe. I just want to thank Stephen for his time. Please, again, continue to go to angelbeat.com if you have questions or if you have suggestions for other topics. Stephen, that's all I have. Is there anything else you want to add before I end the webinar?
No, you brought up one great point, which I forgot to mention, right? So obviously we work with a vast channel. There's some great partners that we work with who have very strong practices around security, but also can help you as you lift and shift into the cloud. So they work very closely with the various cloud providers, like you mentioned, the AWS's, GCPs, and Azures of the world, as well as Oracle. But that was a great point. So my bad for not mentioning that, but thank you for keeping me honest, Ron.
No problem. That's just my job behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Well, thank all of you very much. Stay safe and secure. and we'll look forward to providing great information to you through our digital training initiatives, as well as seeing you at a live event in the very near future. Thanks everyone very much. I'll end the webinar now.